Hey everyone, welcome back to, well, the penultimate episode of our alphabetical taboo busting journey. I cannot believe we're this far, but it is Y for youth. Now, youth might seem again like an odd taboo topic, but it's something that we don't really discuss within the context of a few of the things that we want to talk about today. But before we head into this, I want to welcome my youthful co-host Sylvia, as always.
Hello, my friend. I see that you're very youthful today, very energetic today, as usual.
Well, I try my best. I've heard that flannel shirts keep you young. And I should have maybe shaved for this, got a bit of a baby face going, but no such luck. But I do feel like I do get my youth back when I shave. Funnily enough, last time I did, I was like, wow, I look 16 again. Um, but a lot of people chase that feeling. They chase the idea of like, oh man, I wish I was still that age. And it's funny how we often perceive ourselves as either too old to do something, too young to do something. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, do you know what? I'm exactly the right age to do this, whatever
Mhm,
that is.
mhm.
And I've noticed this both from a workplace perspective, from a personal life perspective. And I know you mentioned having heard people say things during the pandemic like, "Oh, I'm too old to start something new." And it's it's sad to think about how much of our context is really blurred or clouded
Mhm.
by just focusing on age.
I couldn't agree more. And as a woman, age bears an extra sort of elements, right, and burden in a way. So, for example, I'm 38, and when I turned 36, I believe it was, so 2 years ago, I remember people were starting to kind of whisper, like, "Oh, you still don't have kids, and clocks are ticking," and even right, my own healthcare providers are like, "We need to have those critical conversations and make some decisions." And I was very puzzled because I'm like, my decisions were made well before I hit 30. Like, you know what I mean? It's not like because there's a ticking clock, therefore somehow my decisions would change, or somehow all of a sudden I wake up a different person with a different outlook. So right, but there is something really unique about, or something very, I don't know what to call it, but like sort of triggering, I guess, for certain people around the number, right, of age, right? So that quantifiable element of years lived or years left or whatever that is. So I love to explore that. Yet I just would be remiss not to mention, as a woman, there are these funny stories and notions and preconceived notions about, oh, by this age, when I was your age, I was this and that, and I was a mother of three. And I'm like, that's not my path. Thank you for sharing. However, I'm gonna go and do me. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's funny as well because those preconceptions often go very much hand in hand, similarly to because you brought up gender with
Mhm,
like gender stereotypes, even
mhm,
some racial stereotypes. It
mhm,
ends up tying together. And I was actually talking to my wife the other day about this conversation that we remember having with someone about how a lot of people trust older doctors more than younger doctors, even though very often the younger doctors might have gone through medical school a shorter time ago, might have some of the
mhm,
more up-to-date knowledge, despite the fact that they might have more immediate experience and those sorts of things. And
mhm,
same goes for pilots. And funnily enough, the sort of overlap of those well, ageist, I guess,
mhm,
ideas are very tied to gender as well, where there are sadly people that see, female pilots or female doctors as somehow less trustworthy. But if we, I guess, focus on the age bit here, seeing as we're talking about youth, um, it's interesting because we often internalize this as well, where I've I've sometimes within a single day been in separate groups where I've felt like I'm too old for that group and I'm too young for the other one.
mhm,
It's funny because I remember the first sales team I managed, the age gap between the youngest person on the team and the oldest was about 50 years.
Wow.
The youngest person was 18, 19 there for his first job. The other was in his early 70s, like getting close to retirement. And it was funny. Then I was there. Well, I was going to say between the two, but obviously a lot closer to the younger one in age.
Hmm.
But I remember having these feelings of like, should I be managing someone who's like 40 something years older than I am, has
Mm,
a lot more experience in terms of years within this industry and all these thoughts where I was purely looking at the age. I wasn't looking at what skills I brought to the table, or maybe even slightly more importantly, I wasn't looking at, did this 70-year-old dude actually want to run a sales team? Probably not. He was probably fine with doing what he was doing.
mhm,
Um, but then when I would meet the youngest parts of the team, I also felt a disconnect there where I was like, even though there were only a few years between us, I didn't feel like I was at the same place. And I connected that immediately
mm.
with age, when in reality, mentally, I was just in a different place from them. I had different interests, I had different experiences. And I think that's where we often draw a line where there shouldn't be one.
As somebody who was on the receiving end of these stories about age, right? So I was always young for my role, right? And sort of my purview, let's call it that, right? I became really cognizant of this whole concept of, right, how people perceive youthfulness, age, and things like that. So for instance, like I remember when I was applying to be a manager, I remember the hiring manager. So, one of my leaders was like, "You're 5 years away. And what are you, 25?" And I go, "What does that have to do with it? Seriously, like, explain. Like, what am I going to do in the next 5 years that's going to be any different? Like, I've already exceeded goal. I've demonstrated just about every attribute and competency. So tell me, what about why 5 years, right? Like, explain that math to me. And he couldn't, right? He just basically, well, I wasn't a manager until I was 30. I go, well, that's just you. Like, right, that's you. Like, why are you applying that equation to me? And so, like, I always had this tension or struggle with people who basically have this old way of thinking of like, well, you got to simmer more. You got to, develop more, mature more. You're just a couple years from where I was. Yet it didn't take into account, like we talked about the context of it, right? Like, some people are on a different developmental path. Some people are doing that at a different pace, right? At different paces and rhythms and velocity. Yet, like, there's this weird notion in corporate, especially, where it's like, well, no one made manager before 30. And
Until
first
now.
time for everything until now.
But it's it's funny because you mentioned the idea of you need to mature more,
Hmm,
and people connect that again with sort of the folly of youth. You need to grow up from there and everything. But
hmm,
in reality, and this will probably sound a bit harsh, but the people that I've known that have been the most um, I guess stunted in their own maturing journey or their development um, have been people that have, I guess, accepted a lot of those ideas and have gotten stuck in the same position. People that either thought, oh, I'm too young to step up and got stuck, or people that say, oh, I'm too old to try something new and got stuck. And it's been a really interesting and quite eye-opening thing for me to realize over the
hmm,
past few years because if I think back 10 years ago, I had recently started a job somewhere where I basically heard from like half of my coworkers, oh, this was supposed to be a summer job, but here I am 10 years later, 12 years
hmm,
later.
hmm.
And all these people had just been there forever and they'd been doing the same job, the same role in the same building, doing the same things. And like I guess I didn't notice it as much then, maybe because I was kind of
Mm,
fresh out of college and everything.
mm,
But now that I've sometimes maybe run into some of those people when I've gone back to Iceland, a lot of them still in those same shoes, although the company did move buildings, so they at least have a different commute now. Um,
The
but when I
one
meet,
bit of change.
yeah,
Just like,
although I wouldn't be surprised if some of them accidentally went to the old building and then went, oh, oof. And nothing against these people. I totally get that there's certain comfort in that certainty.
mhm,
But when I meet these people, they're the ones that say, "Oh wow, has it been 5 years already? Has it been 6 years already? Has it been this time? Wow, time flies."
mm,
And when I think about how I feel about the past 5 years, as an example, there's a lot of maturing, if we use that word again, that I've seen myself go through that I know for a fact I wouldn't have gone through if I hadn't gone after these things that I was simultaneously too young and too old to go after. If I hadn't gone after, a management role at 25, same as
mhm,
you, if
mhm,
I hadn't decided after building, a successful career in a business, if I hadn't gone, actually now I'm going to go freelance. I'm going to do this on my own. If I hadn't decided, oh, now I'm going to start an AI startup. Now I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to start a podcast. Like
mhm.
if I hadn't just gone for these things, I wouldn't have matured. I would have stagnated. And sure, I'm now 30, so you can give me your old boss's card and I can apply for a management position. But like, but would I have been the same candidate if I would have stayed in that old job for 10 years?
No, no. I mean, and frankly, you probably so that position, let's assume, is still there in this exact same way. You've outgrown it by leaps and bounds. Like that's the crazy thing. So I go like even those 5 years, what we do with those 5 years are vastly different, right? Like that those 5 years would be very different than what someone else would have done with those 5 years. So it's like yeah, sure, I could have waited, yet I probably would have outgrown it. You would have outgrown it in a year. Or right, certainly by 5 years, we would be so different and so I think yeah, developed or have developed beyond that scope that like it would be obsolete anyway. And yet I think what you're talking about is really interesting in that it I think we forget sometimes as leaders that there are outliers, right? Or that pathway of learning and development and growth and maturity is personalized, is highly personal. Every one of us is different. I mean, I know some people who 10 years in still would not achieve that kind of growth that it would take somebody a year to do, right? It's just that's not part of their DNA or that's not part of their mantra or they just don't have that goal or drive or desire. And that's okay. Yet there's this weird broad stroke, one size fits all mentality around youth and age that I think I am bothered by because, for instance, in the Eastern culture that I grew up in, there's this idea that older means wiser. I know plenty of old idiots. I'm just going to say it, okay? Like, age did nothing for them in the wisdom category, right? In the maturity category, in terms of like a human being, zero, right? Did zero for them. Like, so I go, but then there's this, again, broad stroke expectation that I would have to treat an elder, someone just older than I, could be by 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 30, doesn't matter, that I would treat them with more respect and that their counsel is to be revered, even if it's the wrong counsel. Case in point, one of my relatives, not that much older than I, but by the sheer fact that he's a few years older than I, he expected me to take his counsel at face value. He's a fucking idiot. Okay, so I'm gonna say it out loud. And he's never, and let me be a little bit gentler and kinder. He has never done the things that I was seeking counsel in. But just by the fact that he was by status my elder, he thought that he had the right and the authority to tell me what to do. Right, so then you go, wait a minute, like why would I do that? Like, in fact, to your earlier example before we started recording, like what I was trying to do would be better addressed by somebody who was 19 and had been doing it since they were 6. Like, right, so Again, but it was just this broad stroke, one size fits all mentality that is not contextualized. That's not personalized. And that's what I often have a problem with. So again, it's right. Why is it in this day and age when the possibilities are so vast, we still revert to kind of this one size fits all. This is the way it is, right? That it just hasn't been done, therefore it won't be done mentality. Like that. That's actually what bothers me probably more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think, whichever way it goes, if we take the complete flip side of that, like the amount of people that I've seen commenting on videos of kids being really good at something and saying, "Oh, I might as well give up." Like there's a 6-year-old that's better than me in this, and it's like, why does that matter? But I want to be a bit of a devil's advocate and bring something slightly different for conversational purposes, which is the idea that there is one thing that I don't think is something we can't do before a certain age, but I think is something we're unlikely to do before a certain age. Um, and it's, I guess, the simple way to put it would be like intense self work.
Ah,
Um,
fascinating.
And this is something that I was thinking about so much recently when I was talking to a couple of friends, and we realized that all of us around sort of the age of maybe 28 to 30, all of us had these moments where we were like, we've got some shit to unpack. Like, we've got some stuff we need to work through. And we all kind of started, we saw therapists or we changed something big in our lives and we grew through that decision. And all of us also have in common that we have friends of very varying age groups. Like I have friends that are 6, 7, 8 years younger than me and the same, like
Mhm,
older than I am.
mhm,
And I noticed that as one of the biggest differences that I noticed that's purely from an age perspective. And at first, I found it really difficult to accept when I saw friends that were maybe, yeah, 5, 6, 7 years younger than I was, um, claiming there was nothing wrong. They don't need to deal with this. Like it's fine, it's fine. All these like things where I then realized, wow, this is exactly where I was then.
mm,
And I realized that's one of those things that you kind of just have to run into. One day you have to face it yourself. And I'm not saying that no one will ever work on themselves before the age of anything. But I do think that it's almost necessary to go through those years of, you know, I guess self-actualization and realize what's really going on before you can really work through it. Because if you go at it like I guess too young, there is a certain blocker I think for not everyone, but for a lot of people, and certainly I think I would have. I think I was in that camp. Like
mhm,
22-year-old John wouldn't have been as readily available to work through a lot of stuff as I was when I
mhm.
was 28 or so, partially because I just wasn't as aware of it.
I think there is a lot to unpack there in that, besides just that maturity level or awareness level, I think there's just some work, right? The dues we have to pay, right? Like in terms of frustration or like you see the cost of not doing that, but it has to play out in some way. And I think that plays into that awareness you talked about a moment ago. Yeah, I think it's something extra in that. So in my case, right, I really didn't start my inner work until 2, 3 years ago. Yet what sparked that inner work was the dues I was paying, right, in frustration, mental anguish, stress, burnout. So at some point, right, I got to a stage in my life where I woke up exhausted one day and kind of went, why am I doing any of this, or what's going on, or like I felt the spark, right, the light dwindling, and that was the impetus for me to go, something has to change. So either I change my environment, I change who I am, I change all the above, I change who I was with, whatever that was, right? So that awareness came from just being in the thick of it and going, I don't really like this.
Mm.
Right, this feels kind of gross and incongruent and just like kind of wonky or exhausting, just like from a purely physical right sensation perspective of like, this is tiring. I'm sick of it, right? Yet I'll say like I think besides age, there is just the inherent nature of us that I think propels some of us to seek that out faster or right earlier or right just in a more intense way than others. So case in point, so I have a friend who's I have two friends. They're about the same age. They're both younger than I, and it's fascinating because like one person I used to think she was immature or that she has some growing up to do, some of that awareness work. Yet the more I thought about it, like she recently became a parent. And I go, wait a minute, she hasn't changed. Like she's still this very selfish, self-centered, it's all about her kind of thing. And she even has this demeanor where she does like to put people down. She wants to make herself feel better by making others less. Now, similar friend number two, let me rephrase. A friend number two over here, similar age, similar background, even a lot of similarities, except for her inherent attributes. She is someone who's extremely generous, extremely open. I think she is mature for her age, yet it comes from a place of wholeheartedness, right? That she is about community. She is about lifting people up, all the really positive things that I've been working on. And so I go, right? So similar age, both women, similar upbringing. They grew up like even like unbeknownst to each other, miles from one another. Yet there's that massive difference, right? In outcome, in that friend number one, just I think she's a rotten apple, right? Fundamentally she's rotten or she's rotting, and the awareness hasn't come for her yet this other person, same age, right, similar, demographic and all that stuff, like she just is made of better stuff internally. So you could argue that like, wow, like, huh, so right, one's inner work on friend number one side, it may never come, right, that awareness may never come, or if it comes, I hope it does for her. It might come a lot later. It might come a lot more intensely. Whereas friend number two, her inner work journey may or may not even happen, or if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in a much different direction. So there's something kind of funny about, right?
Yeah.
Again, that age thing doesn't, in this case, matter as much as the inherent bits of us, if that makes sense.
This is why I like these conversations. This is why the devil's advocate thing
Yeah.
works. No, it's like because it is really interesting because at face value, it's easy to look at it from an age perspective.
Yeah.
But if I take my devil horns off then
Mhm.
and look at it from exactly that perspective and the one that
Mhm.
we're talking about, I also know people that are way younger than me and have sought out help for their stuff. They've gone
Mhm.
through though that's self work, inner work. Um, so really, if I again throw the age thing out the window, the thing that I truly think is what affects it is something that we'll both know very well from working in sales. It is basically how much pain is it causing you versus the pain of
Mhm.
fixing it.
Mhm.
And I think that's what either speeds or slows it down,
Yeah.
along with the coping mechanisms we learn
Mhm.
in our
Mhm.
youth.
Mhm.
Because so much of what we learn in terms of coping mechanisms, whether you look at people that, yeah, like putting others down and they lash out, or whether we're talking about people with substance abuse,
Mhm.
and depending on those coping mechanisms, that can also be what drives us towards that inner work.
Mhm.
And as an example, like I can take myself as an example of my coping mechanisms weren't healthy, but they were nowhere near as self-destructive as something like substance abuse or self-harm or anything of that nature, which I genuinely believe, in a way, even though it was better for me in the way that I wasn't harming myself to that degree, it did also delay a lot the urgency that I felt in finding that help. And I think regardless of youth or age in general, I think the maturity hit with the realization of really not just how it was affecting me, but how it was affecting those around me.
Mhm.
And the that empathy and that awareness and care for people around you is something that I will never see as connected with age, because
Mhm.
we've seen people of, all sorts of ages be absolutely flippant with people's lives and livelihoods and safety, and we've seen
Mhm.
people of all ages be incredibly kind and
Mhm.
empathetic. So I guess as a to kind of start wrapping us up here, I think no matter how we look at this, it's just another one of the ideas that we cling on to for structure.
Mhm.
It's easier to say, oh, it's an age thing than to dive into the individual structures of the traumas, the coping mechanisms, the ideas that we have. And there's a lot of people that prey on that. There's a lot of groups that prey on getting people that are stuck in those mindsets and in those ways, and they
Mhm.
grab hold of them and they make them into zealots
Mhm.
for their own cause. So next week for the final episode for now of the Alphabet series,
Mhm.
for now,
Mhm.
um, to be determined what comes next, or to be announced rather.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're going to talk about zealotry. And now, people can be zealots for a lot of things, even though typically or colloquially we typically tend to connect this with religious zealots. Actually, if you look up in the dictionary, the word, it can be about anything. It's fanatical following of pretty much any ideology or idea or person or group.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting when you start thinking about, similar to what we discussed on our obsession episode, of where does that line lie between being dedicated to a cause and being a zealot. And I've certainly got some ideas. I'm sure you do as well, but we'll save those for next week.
Looking forward to it, my friend.
Same here.